long time ago, long time ago, there was a people that were enslaved. These people enslaved had their own unique culture. They had their own unique language. They had their own kind of food that they liked to eat. These people had been surrounded and captured and enslaved by the Babylonians. The Babylonians, of course, kind of tried to make them do what they wanted, and through slavery were able to do quite a bit. But these people, this nation, was able to maintain a lot of its identity. They would celebrate with their harvest celebration. They would celebrate the freedom that their God had brought to them. They would remind themselves of stories where boys faced off against giants and prophets would face off against kings. This culture, this people, while they were captives and slaves, belittled, they had hope. They had hope that one day the Anointed One would come. Of course, this Anointed One was one that would be charismatic, someone who would stir hearts and help people to follow. The Anointed One would teach from the sacred texts, and they would have an understanding of strategy. They would have an understanding of cause and effect. This Anointed One would lead people like Moses did to freedom, or like a prophet. Like a king, this Anointed One would be surrounded by people, and perhaps, maybe, they might raise an army. They might subdue their captors and enforce their freedom from the Babylonians. This would-be king would be of this this king, this Anointed One, would be king. And of their kingdom there would be no end. The Anointed One equals Messiah. And the people were the people of Judah, as told in the story of Daniel, chapter 7, verse 14. And today we see that this title, Messiah, is claimed and redefined. We read this from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, verses 27 through 38. So let us together hear these words. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Jesus tells his disciples in verse 31, the Son of Man must suffer, must be rejected, must die and rise. He tells his disciples, if any would like to follow me, they must first deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow. Challenging words. Indeed, because the trouble here is that if the disciples are hearing this for the very first time, that means that a separation is promised. Sometime soon, they will have to give up their beloved teacher. Sometime soon, he will have to suffer. Sometime soon, he will have to suffer rejection at the hands of all these people in our culture, in our nation, part of our identity, people whom we see across the street or at the center of town. These people will reject Jesus. And of course, Peter is the first one to say, wait a second, Jesus. Now just hold your horses just a second now, please. Jesus, come on now, give us a break. Really? This can't be how it goes. I mean, you get that feeling in your heart, right? That says, surely not. Surely not, Jesus. Suffering, rejection, death? It's almost as if Peter didn't hear the last part about resurrection at all. And yet, like that death, that suffering, that rejection really kind of seems to bear the weight of the situation. And he can't handle it. Surely not, Jesus. And of course, Jesus does not have a kind rebuke. And I'm sure that it's a little frustrating for Jesus, having to tell his disciples again and again, something's going to happen. You're going to be without me for a little while. Something's going to come, and it's going to cause us some problems. But Jesus, with love and compassion, I believe, tells his disciples, even though Peter kind of gets it wrong, but kind of gets it right, Jesus says, if any wish to follow me, they must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow. Well, what is a cross? I mean, today, in today's culture, we see crosses plastered on the back of vans. We see crosses on the walls. We see them as decorations within our sanctuaries, and we wear them on gold chains around our necks and on t-shirts. What is that cross? What is that cross? Besides just a mere decoration, I like to think of Luke's baptismal cross that we gave to him the day he was baptized 2 years ago. Not only is it a cross, a straight up and down beam with a cross beam on it, but it's also a shield. That cross for me is, and I like to read deeply into it, is a shield of protection, a blessing, an opportunity that perhaps for his entire life he will be protected and shielded from whatever evil may come his way. for many of us, that cross is mere decoration. But if you think about it from historical context, that cross was never intended to be something pretty, never intended to be something made of gold, never intended to be something that we might somehow look at as beautiful and yet troubling. The cross was intended to be a device to kill people. The cross was intended to end people's lives. The cross was a way that the Romans could offer death and incentive for everybody else to not want to be like that person. It was a public display of power, of forcing people to recognize who has the most might here. Politically speaking, the Romans were in power, and there was no question about it. So any time that anyone was hung up on a cross was because the Romans deemed it so. Any time that someone was hung on that cross was because they had done something so grossly wrong. Perhaps they were a thief. Perhaps they were a militant, some kind of a group that was trying to subvert the Roman authority. Or perhaps they were a civil activist, much the way I think that Jesus was. Someone who empowered the least and the lost. Someone who gave health and bread without asking for anything in return. These Romans would take that cross and nail someone to them and cause them to die. A long and painful suffering process. For 5 days, that person would be hung on a cross and suffocate and die of starvation, of thirst. And in most cases, that person that was hung on the cross and now dead would be left there for all the world to see. Sometimes there would be signs hung above their cross saying, this is what that person's crime was. And you know, when you got signs up there, it teaches all the masses, don't you dare do like that person did. Which means keeping authority and keeping power centralized under those Roman guards, under those powers of authority. Yeah, today's experience of what the cross is far more beautiful than what the Romans had in mind. Jesus tells us, if you wish to follow me, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow. That cross, I'm challenged to say, is not to accept abuse from another. Okay? A lot of churches, a lot of ministers throughout the years have said, you know, your cross to bear is to stay in an abusive marriage. It's not. Your cross to bear is to accept the abuse of your boss at the office, someone who dehumanizes you on a regular basis or who harasses you in ways that are completely inappropriate. No, that is not your cross to bear. It's important for me to say that you are not supposed to be abused. Your cross to bear is not, I think, some holy divine thing that is placed upon you and saying, well, you know, you can take this, so we're gonna cause more trouble upon you. I don't think that's what your cross to bear really means. And it isn't carrying someone else's cross. I have my own cross to carry, and that's not your job to carry it for me. You have your own cross to carry, and it's not my job to carry it for you. Your cross to carry is not oppression for yourself, and nor is it oppression for anyone else. Causing someone trouble, We don't need any of that. There's plenty of it to go around, enough as it is. No, carrying your cross, I think, is about allowing another to be served. It's about elevating others before yourself. It's about making other people's lives just a little bit better. Denying yourself, of course, is to give up those things that your selfish desires would have. And you guys know what those things might mean. So to deny yourself, to pick up your cross and to follow Jesus, is to say, no, somebody else's needs are going to come first today. Somebody else is going to get in line ahead of me at the grocery store, or someone else is going to get in line ahead of me wherever. Denying yourself means giving up something that you would have for yourself and sharing with another human being, making life just a little bit easier for someone else. Jesus continues with a whole lot of really great stuff. You know, what profits them to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Then he goes on to say, those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. That is to say that there is a promise. There is a promise that Jesus will come again. We know that, and we have accepted that. And we know that there are consequences to the way we behave. Jesus tells us that we ought to be about denying ourselves, picking up that cross, and following him. Sometimes that can be a real challenge. I think that sometimes we all have a really, really tough time in the midst of the world that we live in. There's all kinds of things that come battering up against us. Patsy was telling us earlier today about how running into a tree and having some T-post, and I mean, I can only imagine how exciting that must have been. I would not have wanted to puncture the gas tank with that T-post. And I'm so grateful that, Dre, you were there close by, you know? But I was thinking about this nice woman. I got to I got to know her story through the miracles of the internet. How fun is that, right? She says to me that she's driving her minivan. She is there with her child in the back seat, and it's kind of one of those days where moms really know the best. You know, not always do dads know it, but moms really know it. Kid drops the toy on the floor, and it's just all kinds of screaming, all kinds of anger and frustration. And mom just says, you know, what we really need today, because I don't have time and I'm feeling guilty and things are just rough, we're going to go to McDonald's. We're going to go to McDonald's. We're going to go through the drive-thru. We're going to grab some food to go. It's going to be a great thing. So sure enough, mom pulls into the drive-thru lane, and sure enough, there's somebody else already ahead of her in line, and somebody very quickly comes in behind her. Well, so we've got a moment to make an order, but, you know, she grabs the toy out of the floor and tries consoling the child in the back seat, and things are not quite settled yet, but it's going to be okay because I don't have to cook today, and I won't have to have dishes, and all I have to do is just breathe. You guys know what I'm talking about. Don't tell me I'm alone in this one. So they pull up to the car in front of her pulls around, and the car behind her starts honking, hey, get out of the way, and starts, you know, doing their little gestures and trying to encourage somebody to move a little faster. And the mom kind of sees that in the rearview mirror and her screaming child in the back seat. She pulls around to the drive-in, or to the ordering device. I guess it's a sign with, you know, a microphone or whatever. May I have your order, please? And certainly the woman orders her Happy Meal, and cheeseburger and fries and a drink. And she sees behind her this angry person, this person who is just so frustrated with life and tapping their wrist saying, "Can you hurry it up? Let's get moving." And somebody's sure in a rush. And this mom is stressed out. And this kid in the back seat is screaming, even though they still have their toy, and dinner's coming. And that mom scratches her head and she says, "Yeah, that's my order. And I want to get the person's order behind me too." She pulls around to the side and pays a little, pays for her food and pays for the woman behind her. I think that kind of describes in some strange way how denying yourself and picking up your cross and following Jesus really, really looks like. Who knows if the woman in back ever got to say thank you or got to be appreciative or whatever the case may be. But, in that moment, someone who was having a really rough day was able to create a blessing out of a not-so-perfect opportunity. The world is full of things like this. Stories where people deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow. I was hearing the other day about Flora Hogman. She is an orphan from the Holocaust. Her mother surrendered her to a man in a black robe, black trench coat and robe, on a train station platform one day. Flora doesn't remember the goodbye. She only remembers being handed off to this very tall gentleman at the age of 7. And her mom walked away and died in the Holocaust. Flora, on the other hand, was there with this man in a black outfit, taken to a place with wrought iron bars and bricks and big wooden doors. And there she met this person, someone who called themselves Sister. Flora was taken in by the Catholic Church, hidden in Nice, France, away from the Nazis. And even as the Nazis came and took control of the neighborhood, it was this Catholic family, this priest and these sisters, who took care of Flora and hundreds of other children. Deny yourselves. Take up your cross. Follow me. The stories could go on and on. And the beautiful thing is that they all feel really good, and they're obviously not without challenge, because the Nazis are just over the fence. Because the angry person behind you in line at McDonald's, they're there, just a turn from the corner of the street. They're out there, and they need love. And maybe because they run into you, they might get to recognize, they might get to hear from you, who do you say I am? Jesus is calling. Jesus has extended a hand to us and invited us to come and be a part of a relationship. Jesus has called to us and invited us to deny ourselves, to take up a cross, and follow. Who will you say that Jesus is when someone comes to your doorstep and asks for help? Who will you say that Jesus is when somebody's honking their horn behind you in line? Let us pray. O Lord, let the words of our mouths, the meditations of our hearts and the works of our hands be acceptable in your sight, the Lord our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Will you bow your heads in prayer with me? O God, you have freed us from the burdens of the world. You have met us here at the communion table. You have cleansed us from within. Christ has now set forth the challenge to take up our cross and follow. We go unashamed. We follow without boasting. We go to tell the world Christ has come. Christ will come again. In his name and by the faith you have given us, we pray. Amen.